Scientists are professional pattern noticers. But here's the problem. Human brains are actually almost too good at finding patterns.
Oh, absolutely.
Like we are wired to see them even when they aren't real, right?
Oh,
We see faces in the clouds, or, we think wearing lucky socks causes our favorite basketball team to win.
yeah, the classic lucky socks.
Right. Or we see a string of bad luck and just think the universe is out to get us. So if our brains are constantly inventing connections that don't exist, how do you tune out the noise to find the actual science?
Well, I mean, that is the core challenge of scientific observation. We have this incredible biological hardware of our brains that evolved to recognize repeating phenomena.
Because it kept us alive.
Exactly. It kept our ancestors alive when they learned to, associate dark clouds with imminent rain. But in a modern scientific context, we have to take that raw instinct and apply a really rigorous filter to it.
And that is our mission for this deep dive. We are exploring the Bioforge Educator Lab, specifically section 1.2.1, which focuses on the cross-cutting concept of patterns. So if you are a 7th grade life science student, stepping into your first living lab, or maybe a teacher or parent wanting to understand what is happening in this curriculum, you are in the exact right place.
We're looking at quite a stack of documents today, too.
Oh yeah, curriculum frameworks, the science standards for Alaska, the Alaska cultural standards, and all of them point to this massive shift in how you learn science. You are no longer just memorizing facts from a textbook. You are actively figuring out the natural world.
Which is so much more engaging.
It really is. Okay, let's unpack this,
Yeah.
because to actually do that, we need to get into the dirt under the fingernails reality of what a pattern actually is.
So, in plain language, a scientific pattern is just a repeating form, a cycle, a trend, or a predictable relationship in nature.
Like a visual pattern.
Yeah, it could be visual, like the branching venation on a leaf or the spiral arrangement of scales on a spruce cone. But it could also be behavioral, like a bird migration.
More temporal, right?
Yeah.
Like seasons.
Exactly, like the seasonal timing of berry ripening. In the science classroom, we essentially formalize our human instinct to notice these things. We use them to organize really complex observations and compare evidence.
But I want to push back on this right away. Because if a 7th grader goes out into the tundra expecting to find a pattern in a food web, aren't they just going to, cherry pick the data until it fits their expectation?
That's a really valid point.
Right. Isn't looking for patterns inherently biased?
It absolutely can be, well, if the pattern is treated as the final conclusion. And this is a crucial distinction. A true scientific pattern requires empirical testing.
So you don't just see something twice and call it a law of nature.
No, definitely not. You use that observation to ask a better question. So if you think you see a pattern in animal tracks in the snow, you then have to gather data to see if that pattern actually holds true across different seasons or different snow conditions in different locations.
I was thinking about this, and is it sort of like trying to tune an old analog radio dial?
Oh, I like that.
You are turning the knob, and there's all this static and hissing. You have to figure out what is the actual song, the real underlying pattern, versus what is just random background noise.
The radio dial is a very useful way to think about it, because in nature, that random static is what physicists call entropy, or disorder. The natural world is incredibly messy and chaotic.
Yeah, it's not a neat little laboratory.
Right, so when you observe a highly ordered pattern, like the distinct layered zones of life in a rocky tide pool, it really stands out against the chaos. That order tells you that there is a systemic constraint at play.
Like a physical law.
Maybe a physical law, or maybe it's an evolutionary adaptation to saltwater and sun exposure. By analyzing these spatial or structural patterns, you are actively filtering out the static. You isolate variables and figure out where the energy is actually flowing.
Which means the pattern itself isn't the final answer. It is a clue.
A pattern is the starting point. It organizes the mess so you can decide what needs further investigation. It prompts the investigator to ask, well, what underlying mechanism is driving this repeating structure?
And using patterns as clues is not some new trick invented for a modern middle school classroom. I mean, if we look back, noticing patterns has been the historical engine of scientific discovery for centuries.
Oh, absolutely. The history of science is essentially a history of recognizing patterns and then hunting for the mechanisms behind them.
Right.
Like, go all the way back to 300 BCE. Early naturalists, like the Greek philosopher Theophrastus, looked at simple visual structures to classify plants. He categorized them broadly as herbs, shrubs, or trees based entirely on observable patterns in their growth.
Which, seems rudimentary to us now, sitting here with electron microscopes.
It was rudimentary, sure, but it was a necessary cognitive scaffold. It eventually evolved into Linnaean taxonomy in the 1700s, and that gave the global scientific community a shared system to classify biodiversity.
And we see this across every discipline, don't we?
Everywhere. Astronomers mapped repeating patterns in the night sky, tracking the movement of stars, which eventually led to understanding planetary orbits and gravity. Geneticists noticed inheritance patterns long before they even knew what DNA was.
Which brings up one of my favorite historical examples from our sources, Dr. John Snow and the London cholera outbreak of 1854. This is a complete masterclass in filtering out the static to find the song.
The John Snow example perfectly illustrates the power of spatial patterns. At the time, cholera was just devastating London, and the prevailing theory, the static on the radio dial, was the miasma theory.
The bad air theory.
Right. People believed the disease was caused by bad, foul-smelling air. It was a terrifying time because you couldn't see or fight bad air.
But Snow didn't just accept the static.
No, he looked for the pattern. Snow physically walked the streets of the Soho district, knocking on doors, interviewing families, and recording where every single cholera death occurred.
He actually plotted them on a map, right?
He did. He plotted these deaths as dots on a city map. And when he stepped back, a glaring spatial pattern emerged. The dots were highly clustered around one specific area, which was the public water pump on Broad Street.
Wow. So he used a spatial pattern in the data to replace random, fearful speculation with hard, empirical evidence.
Exactly. He famously convinced the local council to remove the handle from the Broad Street pump, and the outbreak localized around it stopped.
And he didn't even know what a bacterium was at that point.
He had no idea. But the pattern led him to the mechanism, which was contaminated water.
That's incredible. But what about the danger of getting stuck on a pattern? Like if you just stop there, you might miss the bigger picture, right?
And that leads to a really vital concept regarding the nature of science. Patterns lead to discoveries, but scientific explanations can and do change when new evidence appears.
Because science is always open to revision.
Always. Consider those early naturalists categorizing plants by visual patterns like leaf shapes or flower colors. For a long time, if two plants looked similar, they were classified together.
Makes sense.
But centuries later, when we developed the tools to look at genetic patterns in DNA, we realized that some plants with nearly identical visual structures were completely unrelated on an evolutionary level.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the new genetic evidence contradicted the older visual pattern. Science is an iterative endeavor. The pattern is just the best model we have until better evidence comes along.
Okay, let's bring these historical concepts right into your backyard. Now that we understand how scientists use patterns to hunt for mechanisms, how do 7th graders apply this to the living laboratory of Alaska? Because the Bioforge curriculum is heavily grounded in the local physical environment.
Right. For students in Alaska, science isn't confined to bubbling glass beakers in a sterile white room. The laboratory is the rugged coastline, the rushing salmon streams, and the frozen tundra.
The curriculum even uses visual language to reinforce this connection, doesn't it?
It really does. If you look at the Bioforge Digital Hub, you see a specific color palette, like lichen gold and botanical teal. You see anatomical blueprints, intricate leaf venation, and the spirals found in seed pods. It visually surrounds the student with repeating natural structures, literally priming their brain to observe.
So what are some concrete life science examples they are investigating? Because we are talking about scaling from microscopic cells all the way up to the entire biosphere.
Let's start at the population level, looking at food webs. Ecologists and our students track the highly predictable cyclical patterns of predator and prey. A classic Alaskan example is the population oscillation of the Canada lynx and the snowshoe hare.
They are essentially locked in a biological dance, right?
They are. The hare population booms, and because there is so much food, the lynx population booms shortly after. But then, the massive hare population overgrazes on local vegetation like willow.
So they run out of food.
Exactly. Their numbers crash due to starvation and heavy predation. Suddenly, the lynx have no food, and their population crashes right behind the hares. The vegetation recovers, and the cycle starts all over again. It is a temporal pattern driven by a brutal mechanism.
Or you see it in how animals respond to environmental changes, like moose browsing patterns. If a forest fire sweeps through an area, it burns down the mature spruce trees. The pattern of the forest completely changes.
Right, it resets the landscape.
Yeah, successional plants like birch and willow shoot up in the aftermath, and suddenly the moose browsing patterns shift dramatically to exploit this new food source.
And these patterns scale down to the structural and cellular levels, too. Students investigate the freeze tolerance patterns of interior Alaskan wood frogs or tundra lichen.
I have to stop you right there because the sources mention this freeze tolerance, and it absolutely blows my mind. But the text just lists it as a fact. What is actually happening?
It's amazing, isn't it?
How does a frog survive being frozen solid? Because, I mean, if I put a strawberry in the freezer, the water inside the cells turns to ice, expands, and completely ruptures the cell walls. When it thaws, it's just mush. Why doesn't the wood frog turn to mush?
This is where we look at the mechanism behind the structural pattern. As the temperature drops, the wood frog's body recognizes the pattern of the changing season. It triggers a response where the frog's liver produces massive amounts of glucose, sugar, and pumps it into the bloodstream and cells.
So it's like a built-in biological antifreeze.
That's exactly what it is. It lowers the freezing point of the liquid inside the cells just enough so that ice crystals form between the cells, not inside them. The cellular structure remains intact.
Wait, really?
Yeah. The frog's heart stops, its breathing stops, and it appears dead. But come spring, the ice melts, the heart restarts, and the frog just hops away. The pattern of the seasons drives the biochemical pattern of survival.
That is unbelievable. And it perfectly illustrates finding the how and why instead of just looking at the what. But here's where it gets really interesting and, well, a little alarming. Because not all patterns are about stability or predictable cycles.
Unfortunately, no.
Some patterns indicate systemic collapse. Our sources highlight a modern phenomenon referred to as the silent smoke shacks on the Yukon River.
This is a sobering but absolutely essential investigation for our students. For generations, the Yukon River during summer was defined by the busy, noisy pattern of fish camps. People harvesting, cutting, and smoking Chinook salmon.
But recently, a new pattern has emerged, right? Historic wooden smoke shacks and fish camps sitting completely empty and silent. What is causing that sudden pattern of silence?
It is the result of a devastating pattern of decline in Yukon Chinook salmon populations, which eventually led to historic multi-year moratoriums on fishing. When students investigate this, they realize that a population collapse of this magnitude isn't usually just one giant, catastrophic event.
It's a pattern of small, accumulating disruptions over decades. I was trying to picture how to explain this accumulation of small disruptions to a seventh grader, and I keep coming back to a Jenga tower. You have this tall, stable tower representing the salmon population, and every year, a small disruption pulls out one block.
Let's follow that analogy. What are the blocks being pulled out?
Right. So one block gets pulled out because the river water temperatures are slowly warming, which stresses the fish.
Yep.
Another block gets pulled out because the food web in the Bering Sea is shifting, altering what the salmon eat in the ocean. Another block is removed because we notice a pattern of decreasing adult body sizes, like the fish returning are getting smaller and smaller, carrying fewer eggs.
And for a long time, the tower still stands. The salmon keep returning. The overall pattern looks relatively stable from the outside.
Right. You can pull out a dozen Jenga blocks and the tower is still upright. But then you pull out one more block and the entire structure suddenly collapses. That is systemic dynamism, the balance of stability and change. The silent camps are the aftermath of the tower falling.
By using mathematical models to map these variables, students trace how those small changes accumulated and eventually push the salmon population past a critical threshold. The pattern of empty camps forces them to understand the hidden mechanism of the collapse.
And tracing those changes over decades or even centuries brings us to a vital point. Tracking these ecological shifts in Alaska relies heavily on knowledge that didn't just start when a weather satellite was launched in the 1990s.
Not at all. If we want to understand long-term patterns, we have to look to an ancient, ongoing scientific tradition. The Alaska Cultural Standards require the integration of traditional ecological knowledge, or TEK.
And we need to be really clear about what that means.
We must be explicitly clear. Traditional ecological knowledge is a rigorous, empirical system of science. It relies on the exact same fundamentals of observation and pattern recognition. It is not an add-on, it is not a metaphor, and it must never be reduced to folklore.
It is a scientific baseline built on thousands of years of continuous data collection and survival.
Indigenous communities in Alaska have lived alongside and observed local ecosystems for millennia. Elders, families, hunters, fishers, and gatherers possess a highly localized intergenerational understanding of patterns.
Like what kind of pattern?
They track the patterns in weather, animal migrations, sea ice thickness, and tidal movements. This careful observation is what allows people to live responsibly and sustainably with the land and water.
The sources give a breathtaking concrete example of this. The 11,110-year-old stone tidal weir at Shaken Bay. I read about this, but I kept asking myself, how does a pile of rocks actually work for 10,000 years? It's not a modern concrete dam.
It is a brilliant piece of hydroengineering based entirely on pattern recognition. The weir is a crescent-shaped wall of stones built in the intertidal zone. The builders had to understand the exact cyclical patterns of the tides in that specific bay.
So what happens when the tide comes in?
At high tide, the water rises over the stones, and the salmon swim in to feed near the shore. As the tide recedes, the water flows out through the porous gaps in the stones, but the fish are gently corralled into a specific, shallow pool where they can be easily and selectively harvested.
So they aren't just blocking the water, they're using the pattern of the water's movement.
Yes. Building and maintaining it requires a multi-millennial understanding of highly complex tide patterns, hydrodynamics, and salmon behavior. You have to know precisely where to place the stones so they aren't destroyed by winter storms, but still catch the fish during the summer runs.
That's incredible.
And we see this same depth of understanding in the ongoing Gwich'in salmon stewardship on the Dranchik River, where harvesting patterns are constantly optimized based on careful environmental monitoring.
So, reading the curriculum framework, there are a lot of heavy academic terms. It talks about how integrating these knowledge systems shares the same epistemological mechanics. Let's unpack that. Epistemology is just a fancy word for how we know what we know. So epistemological mechanics basically means the actual nuts and bolts of how we do science, right?
That is a perfect translation. Both systems, Western science and traditional ecological knowledge, share the exact same nuts and bolts. Both require meticulous observation, both rely heavily on pattern recognition, both insist on testing ideas against lived experience.
On communicating it.
Right. Both demand careful communication of those findings to the community.
So when a 7th grade student is sitting in the classroom, how do local indigenous knowledge and Western scientific investigation actually connect for them?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, integrating these systems ensures that science isn't presented as some abstract concept imported from a faraway laboratory.
It grounds it.
It grounds it, and it ensures that all learners, especially students from cultural groups historically underrepresented in STEM fields, see their own heritage and their own community's deep history as a valid, rigorous foundation for scientific inquiry.
They realize their ancestors were scientists.
They realize that their ancestors were scientists and that they are scientists right now. It moves science from a decontextualized vocabulary list to a vital tool for community survival.
Which really brings the entire mission of the Bioforge Educator Lab into focus. As you listen to this, whether you are preparing for a biology test or planning a lesson for your classroom or just trying to support your student at the kitchen table, realize that patterns are the cognitive scaffolding of all science.
They are the bridge. Patterns connect raw, messy evidence to theoretical models, and they connect those models to the final explanations of how the world actually works.
From the very small to the very large.
Exactly. They are the tool you use to make sense of everything from the microscopic freeze tolerance of a single wood frog cell to the vast nutrient cycling flow of a tundra watershed.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with the core philosophical takeaway of this entire curriculum unit. It is something we touched on earlier, but it is the single most important thing to remember. A pattern is not the answer. A pattern is where the investigation begins.
It is the invitation to ask why.
And that leads me to a final thought for you to mull over. We've spent this time talking about human brains recognizing patterns.
Okay.
But we are entering an era of artificial intelligence and machine learning.
Oh, that's a whole new frontier.
Right. We have computers that can scan 1 million satellite photos in a second and find a pattern of deforestation or climate shift faster than a human ever could. AI is the ultimate pattern noticer. But an AI doesn't feel curiosity.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't care about the ecosystem. It can find the pattern, but can it ever truly ask why? Will science always need the human element to care about the mechanism behind the static?
The pattern is just data until human mind decides it matters.
So, to our listeners, the professional pattern noticers out there stepping into the living lab of the world today, filter out the static. Look closely at the systems around you and ask yourself, one pattern I can look for this week is,